Chapter 1. Therese dribbled past me, switching hands as I taught her. A few months shy of 12, she'd gotten taller in the last year, but still only came halfway up my chest. With her dark hair in the same braids that she always had, the shrimp looked closer to 10. Mom, Lexi, and Therese had white t-shirts and velour jogging suits in every color that particular clothing company produced. Even though Therese had plenty to choose from, she always chose purple. Little Miss Perfect annoyed me, the way she always seemed so hell-bent on doing the right thing. Fluent in French, she also played the oboe. Hers was a custom-made of the best grenadilla, an African black wood. Dad brought it home from Paris when Therese was only 5. What other kid had $10,000 oboe? I suppose I shouldn't talk. Dad did buy a $4,000 Gretchen trumpet when I was only 6. But down here, my choices of people to hang out with limited. Time wasn't. Almost 6 years in the compound. 6 years. Well, over 2,000 days, most of them pretty much the same. But routine tends to equal comfort, which does provide some semblance of security. My alarm went off at 7. I rose to do Tai Chi for half an hour. Graham had taught Eddie and me that during the summers that we stayed in Hawaii. The exercise ritual made me feel closer to both of them. Then I showered. The bathroom was dark blue marble with a huge Whirlpool tub, as well as a step-in shower that could hold an entire football team. A mirror ran the length of the room, and I had 2 sinks all to myself. I switched every other day, with no particular reason why. Guess I relished having an option. Not many of those underground. Most days I weighed myself and checked out my body in the mirror. I was 6 feet and still growing, 180 pounds, and my muscles were well defined. Was I vain? I don't think so. I just worked hard at getting my physique to that level. The outside was a lot easier to perfect than the inside. For obvious reasons, thoughts of Eddie invaded me most times when I looked in the mirror. If he were alive, I wondered, would he have the same build, the same hair? Looking to control some aspect of my life, I'd refused to cut my hair after I turned 12. It fell past my shoulders. Sometimes I let it down, so I had to peer out from behind a curtain. I couldn't see anyone, and it made me believe they couldn't see me either. I pulled my hair back into a ponytail secured with bands. I'd taken them from Lexi. It was nice having the same face as Eddie. I'd never had to struggle to picture him. I simply looked in the mirror. Some days that face was comfort, but other days I couldn't bear to see his face or mine. Every day I'd dressed in jeans and a t-shirt emblazoned with Dad's company's logo, YK, the biggest computer manufacturer and software developer in the world. Early in the compound, Dad explained that there was clothing in every size that we could possibly need. He just neglected to mention that while sizes were limitless, style selection was not. In addition to jeans and YK t-shirts, my wardrobe consisted of gray sweatpants. Certainly didn't take me long to pick out something in the morning. In our old world, my favorite shirt was an orange and white striped rugby. Eddie had one too, but he never wore his. I loved orange so much that I practically wore the shirt out. When we arrived down here, there was one in my closet, but I outgrew it. After I told Mom it was too small, it just didn't come back from the laundry. I missed the color. If I could have had one new thing to wear, it would have been a big orange hooded sweatshirt. My routine also included running 6 miles on the treadmill in the gym each afternoon. The gym was big, the type you'd see in a school or a YMCA, with the extra 50 feet or so at the end for fitness machines. A rower, an elliptical machine, a treadmill, and a recumbent bike made up the cardio part, with a boatload of free weights for the strength portion. No one lifted weights except me anymore. In the old world, and for a time in the new, Dad had been obsessed with exercise. He was obsessive about a lot of things, but exercise was near the top. He told me that a powerful man should have a powerful body as well. He's the one that got me into lifting and running every day. So I was surprised when he just stopped. It wasn't a gradual thing where he'd skip a day and then start up again. One day he just stopped, and I never saw him set foot in the gym again. I didn't ask why. I never asked why. We weren't allowed to question our father in the old world, and the same rules applied here in the compound. Anyway, nothing he would do or say could change our reality. Besides, I liked having the place to myself most of the time. Mom would use the cardio equipment when she felt up to it, and once in a while I'd break routine and shoot baskets with Therese. I lunged, stealing the ball from her a bit too rough. I was careful not to let my hands touch her. Since the first night in the compound, I didn't ever touch anyone with my bare hands. "You have to protect it, Reese." Therese stopped to look at me, her green eyes bright. "I've been thinking about Father." As much as I've heard my sister speak every day, I could never get used to that English accent, or the way that she called our parents mother and father. Like all of us, she had her own routines, one of which was to watch Mary Poppins at least once a day. She must have seen it more than 1,000 times. I'd wish that DVD would finally wear out. She sucked on one of her braids and said, "Do you hate him?" I shot and missed. Her eyebrows went up. "I just wondered." The ball bounced off the wall and rolled toward me. I retrieved it and dribbled. I ignored her, figuring she'd just keep talking anyway. It was nothing new for her to talk about Dad behind his back and then be all adoring daughter to his face. She kept on talking. "I do, you see. I think I might hate him." She caught my pass and did a layup. I shook my head, rebounded, I shot again, and then I caught the ball when it dropped through the net. Granted, I wasn't Dad's biggest fan. He ran our lives in the compound the way he had on the outside. The only one who had ever questioned Dad's decisions was Graham. She was the one person I'd seen stand up to him. The last time Eddie and I went to Hawaii with her, we almost didn't get to go. I wanted to go so badly, too. She lived in a small rural community, all locals descended from long lines of locals where no one cared who we were. For those short weeks we spent with her every summer, we were just kids from the mainland. At first, Dad refused. He said we should be at home going to science and math camps. But Graham marched into his office dressed in a hibiscus-covered muumuu. She emerged a few minutes later, wide smile on her face, and Dad had been close behind with a frown on his. I could only imagine how different things would be in the compound if Graham had made it. For the rest of us, challenging Dad's judgment was out of the question, and I'd stopped asking him the first year whether he had been able to make contact with anyone on the outside and how long our supplies of water and food and power would last. "I've planned for every contingency," was his stock reply. And there was the way he would spend a week in bed and all of a sudden not sleep for days. Weird. Even then, we never voiced our doubts about his leadership. Besides, would it have changed our situation? Made things better? No. So there was no point, and we all knew it. Therese bent down to tie one of her shoes. They were the same white top-of-the-line cross-trainers that we all wore, which lay stacked in boxes in every size in one of the storerooms. "I believe I do hate Father. He did this to us. He made me leave my friends and my school. He made us stay here." Usually I just let her motor mouth wear itself out, but I was in an ornery mood. "That's pretty stupid." I tossed the ball from one hand to the other. "If we weren't here, do you know where we would be?" "Of course I do," Therese straightened back up. We would be home in Seattle with Eddie and Clementine. Until that moment, I'd forgotten about Clementine, Therese's ragdoll kitten. Clementine was cute, acted more like a dog than a cat. As allergic as he was, even Eddie played with Clementine until he wheezed. Eli, you'd be there with Coco. Her tone was nannyish and condescending. Just the mention of Coco's name stopped my breath for a minute. My chocolate lab puppy, a constant fixture on my bed and at my side. I missed her. But I pushed away the memories. You're being ridiculous. No one is there anymore. You know about the bombs, right? Eli. Her voice got louder, but she was still matter-of-fact. Perhaps we could find someone. Perhaps others are alive. I hate Father for doing this to us. I rolled my eyes and I listened to the rant. Little Miss Perfect was losing it. I knew what the whole situation had done to me when I was 9. I couldn't imagine the adverse effects it would have on a normal 6-year-old's mental state. Actually, I could, given the whole Mary Poppins thing. Making up a scenario that you could live with was easier than dealing with a reality you could not. I understood the benefits of that. Okay, I said. Her eyes went up in sync with the corners of her mouth. So you do believe me? Of course. Among other talents, I'd always been a decent liar. Therese's shoulders drooped. I miss home dreadfully. I wish we were there with Graham and with Eddie. Yeah, well, wish in one hand, crap in the other, and see which fills up first. I'd always been a stellar jerk. Grow the hell up. Eddie's dead. Graham is dead. They're gone forever. Deal with it. My sister's mouth dropped open and slowly closed. Her eyes narrowed. You're not at all like Eddie. It was definitely time for her to leave. My toes lined up slightly behind the free throw line. Every day I shot 300 of them. I started shooting them the first full day here. After 6 years, my percentage had improved to 84. You don't even remember Eddie. You're too young. I do so remember him. She tilted her head a bit, studying me. He looked like you. My follow-through was practiced and precise. That's a little easy, don't you think? We're twins. Swish. You see me every day. Her hands were on her hips. He wasn't all mean like you. He was nice, and he cared more about stuff. My first thought was to protest, but I realized it wasn't worth a breath. She was right. I got the rebound, and I lined up again. Tried to concentrate, pretended she was a jeering crowd. It wasn't that much of a stretch. Therese continued to pounce. At least he played with me. You never did. You always ignored me. You even teased him for playing with me. You said I was a baby. There wasn't much to say in my defense. In the old world, Eddie and I were so close I never made a point of reaching out to our sisters. The reason was simple. I just didn't need them. Between school, ballet, and piano, Lexi just wasn't around that much, but Therese was. And Eddie always saved time for her. The ball left my hands. The shot was good. Therese kept up her rant. You ignored me in here until I was 10. Her face was red, but I knew she wouldn't cry. Early on, she learned, as we all did, that tears did not help. They wouldn't bring back anything or anyone. She held up 4 fingers as I jogged after the ball. 4 years, Eli, 4 years you didn't even look at me. There was a good reason for that. She reminded me too much of Eddie, the way he was kind to everyone, same as my mom. Part of me hated Therese for being so good, for being the one everyone adored. It made me miss him more. Despite the fact that I tended to treat Therese badly, she kept coming back for more. Maybe because I was as close as she was ever going to get to Eddie. Even so, I knew where she was coming from, missing Eddie like she did. I was sure that she'd rather have him instead of me. Eddie was the kind of older brother anyone would want. For 9 years, he'd been the kind of brother I had, but I screwed that up in a big way. I chucked the ball at my sister hard, smacking her on the butt. "Ow!" she scowled, and I laughed. "You're so mean!" Her accent wavered when she got ticked off. She grabbed her ratty old poo from his spot by the door and left. Alone at last. But as I shot my free throws, I couldn't stop thinking about what my sister had said. Stupid kid could make up stories. It was definitely a coping mechanism, but my gut was wrenched. Was it the mention of Eddie, or the fact that someone besides me admitted that they thought about him on a regular basis? Even though it was just Little Miss Perfect, someone besides me believed maybe he was out there somewhere, alive. I tried so hard not to think of him, not to believe he might have survived. People often talk about uncanny connections between identical twins, about twins raised separately who ended up innately similar. That wasn't the case with Eddie and me. As we were always together, everything in our environments was the same. We took our first steps the same day. We lost our first baby teeth within hours of each other. Both grew 2 inches in the same year. And then we had our roles. He was the leader. I let him lead because I liked to follow. Followers were rarely accountable for their actions. In addition to leading, Eddie was also my protector. Always had been. We were 8 years old the last summer we stayed with Graham in Hawaii. One afternoon we picnicked by a waterfall. Eddie and I lived in our board shorts and rash guards that summer. Graham, smelling of white shoulders, wore a red muumuu, her long hair loose, a pink pu'ua flower behind one ear. She spread a dolphin print beach towel on the grass before laying out an appetizing buffet of spam and rice, leftover Kahlua pork, Eddie's daily ration of Jack Link's beef jerky, which he couldn't live without, fresh mangoes, and guava juice. For dessert, a small cooler held my favorite strawberry mochi ice cream balls. We finished lunch, Eddie and I, and took a frisbee and went off by ourselves. I followed Eddie up a steep hill, tossing the disc to him. The breeze from the falls pushed it back my way. I grabbed for it and I missed, reaching so far that I lost my balance. As I tumbled down the hill, my back slammed into a tree. It stopped my downward progress, knocking away my breath. Arms waving, legs kicking, I struggled for air. Eddie stood at the top of the hill over the rushing water. He called down to me, "Eli, stop moving! Stop!" Minutes passed. My breath came back. I moved to get back up on my feet. Again, Eddie called to me, "Eli, don't move! I'm coming!" Like a crab, he inched his way down the hill. As he came closer, his eyes narrowed at something past me. I twisted my head in order to see what he saw. The tree that had taken my breath was the only thing between me and the long, fatal drop to the rocks beneath the falls. I reached out for my brother. Eddie pressed both his palms into my chest to calm me. "Eli, I got you. I got you." He gripped my arm, and we crawled back up the hill together. At the top, relieved, I rolled over onto my back, panting. "Don't tell Graham." Eddie also winked. Duh. Being in the compound without Eddie, it seemed to get harder every day. We didn't talk about him much. Dad had said early on that this was our life and we should move on, not keep thinking about the way things used to be. After talking to Therese that morning in the gym, remembering Eddie, all I wanted to do was talk about him and to pretend he could hear me if I talked. I tried to imagine our lives as they may have been, sort of a what would Eddie do? If things were normal and we were in the old world, going to high school, Eddie probably would have 1,000,000 girlfriends. He'd had all the friends in grade school, and I knew I was only in the mix because of him. High school wouldn't have been much different. I'd be getting dragged out on double dates with his girlfriend's friends. Knowing Eddie, he probably would insist on it. Sometimes my thoughts took a different direction. What would Eddie do if Eddie were here? I hit my 50th free throw. Despite knowing he and Graham had perished on the outside that night 6 years before, I never truly felt our connection break. There was the emptiness, of course, along with a huge feeling of loss, but that feeling of connection, the only a twin could understand, I still had that. Lining up my next shot, I started to release the ball. "That's off." The voice startled me even as I tried not to show it, although my lousy shot was proof enough. Dad walked out of the shadows underneath the basket as my air ball went past him. He let it bounce off the wall before catching it, and then tossed the ball from one hand to the other. "You and Therese have a nice game." "Huh?" That caught me off guard. Had he heard our conversation? Yeah, her game needs some work, though." Dad chuckled a bit and then tossed me the ball. "She has a grand imagination, that one." I nodded, unsure what to say. Walking to the door, away from me, he paused but didn't turn around. "I'm sure you can set her straight." "Set her straight?" "Basketball." One hand raised in the air, the wrist flipped a bit. "Her game." And then he left. Although he didn't come out and say it, I sensed he'd heard me and Therese. And after the exchange with my sister that morning in the gym, I wondered what Eddie would do if he had been in the compound instead of me. Despite believing that I were dead, would he trust that feeling of connection and still hold out hope for a miracle? Through 250 more free throws, of which I made 227, I already knew the answer. If there were even the slightest chance the world was not as it seemed, a tiny slice of hope that his twin might still be alive, he would find out, or else die trying. Give this book a shot and you have a great week. I'll see you next Friday. Bye.